name's Alan Steinfeld. I host a show called New Realities. You can see that on YouTube. And for all the things that happen here this weekend, you get a DVD right at the end. You can order the whole set. If you've missed something or you want to hear it again, go for it. So today, this is not a panel. This is a discussion among 4 leading experts about something I think is probably almost as interesting as aliens. The undiscovered Earth beneath our feet. Antarctica, the mysterious continent.
Which has aliens in it.
Which has aliens in it. Because I'll introduce the discussants here. David Adair, who I don't think we know 1/10 of what this guy knows. He hasn't even told us all his secrets, have you, David? No. Well, we're waiting. Today's the day, okay? And then, of course, Linda Moulton Howe, who's... I think she's a national treasure, I do. And what her YouTube channel has over 100,000 subscribers, she is giving the hardcore evidence of what really went on there and what the mystery is of Antarctica. So we are going to get into that. Thank you, Linda, for being here. And
Thank you.
Yeah. And Brad Olsen, one of the few who's made the voyage.
Swag.
The voyage to Antarctica and has lived to tell about it, right? 26 days on a boat.
Yep.
That's exciting. Thank you. And Michael Salla, who's an expert researcher who goes deep into all the knowledge. So if this is going to be a discussion, we have to understand what we're talking about, right? What is Antarctica? What is the possibilities? Do you want to start, Linda? Because you've talked to whistleblowers, and give a kind of overview, and then other people can jump in and see how they add their knowledge. So how did it get there? What is it?
Well, in terms of, we'll call it Earth history, you can go back to around the 1500s, and there allegedly might have been a ship that got as far as Antarctica. It doesn't solve the map that people argue about, whether or not there was actually a Piri Reis map that showed Australia for real, like from above, and may or may not have had outside intelligence. I'm not talking about that. There were discoveries, though, in the 15th century, and then as we got closer into the 18th and 19th century. So there is a modern history that is older than a lot of people think in terms of at least exploration reaching something near Antarctica. The big mystery that I was shocked to discover as I was doing the Spartan 1 and 2 whistleblowers is the question, how did Antarctica become covered with 1 to 3 miles thick ice while the rest of the world was not covered? And the more you dig into that, you will find that something very strange happened 34 to 33 million years ago. In the previous 100 million years from there, Pangea, it is a Greek word that means the whole world. That's when the land masses were all congealed together. And then something happened, volcanic pressure started splitting apart, and a kind of roundish, huge land. A lot of people don't realize that Antarctica is 1.5 times the size of the United States. And it started for reasons that kept expanding down and down and down, and it took about 100 million years for this huge landmass to make it to the South Pole. The entire time it was hot or warm and tropical. They found this in terms of pollen and sediments and drilling, which they have hard evidence, various kinds of dinoflagellates that only could have been alive if there were warm temperatures. And this all leads up to why 34 million years ago, suddenly in the continent of Antarctica at the South Pole, it started for 1 million years becoming covered with 1 to 3 miles of ice. So it is a geophysical mystery. It is a mystery from the standpoint that from World War II, Antarctica was associated in that war with Nazis possibly having a link to extraterrestrials from Aldebaran, a reddish sun 65 light years from Earth.
Linda, I don't mean to interrupt, but just...
But it's just coming up to now, all of this is the background about why this is so strange, and then now military whistleblowers are saying that there are alien structures there.
Right. No, thank you.
And when would they have been built if the last time this continent was without ice 34 million years ago?
Well, that's the big question. So let's have other people join that discussion. Right. Brad, what were you saying?
Well, Linda brought up the Piri Reis map, and I include that in my talk too. And if we could focus in on what Antarctica looked like before the ice, you'll see that there is water channels below it. It's much smaller than the land mass and ice mass that we see today. East Antarctica is one of the oldest land masses in the world, over 3 billion years old. As Linda pointed out, was once part of Pangaea when it broke off. It broke off from Australia and Africa, whereas West Antarctica, the peninsula here, that's the area I visited, that is much newer. That's 700 million years old, relatively new in geological time. And there the mountains are very dramatic, very shooting straight up out of the water, and is incredibly beautiful with the glaciers calving right off. But on the point of the Piri Reis map, if you can see the blow up of what Antarctica looked like without the ice, as well as along the Palmer Peninsula there are many islands. I visited about a dozen of them myself. Without the ice, you would have been able to see them as was depicted on the Piri Reis map. And with global warming, they're still discovering new islands all the time.
But the Piri Reis map existed after the freezing over, so the mystery is how did they able to detect the land when it was covered with ice? So, David, do you have anything to add to the whole Antarctica discussion?
I don't know as much as these people do, but I do have something more on a personal note. See, my surrogate mother was Viola Armstrong. She had a son named Neil.
Oh, really?
So I grew up in that world, and because of that, I got to know Buzz Aldrin really well. And I got to talk to Buzz about 7 months ago. And he, as you know, the story goes, he went down to Antarctica, had a heart attack, stroke combo, and came back. And then there was stuff on the internet. And finally I had to look at Buzz and ask him, Buzz, what happened down there, bud? He's looking at me, and I've known the man since 1970. And in all the years I've known him, Buzz is a tough guy. Y'all remember when he socked that guy in the jaw for saying he didn't go to the moon? And the judge said, case dismissed, you got what you deserve. And so Buzz is not he's not a wimpy person at all, if you know him. And but when I asked him that and he stared out the window, that's the first time I ever saw Buzz scared. And he didn't tell me what's going on. It's what he didn't say that worried me the most. And whatever it is, it really frightened Buzz, and Buzz don't frighten easy. You remember the circumstances? All these one percenters were going down there. It's like a new Disney World. Then Buzz has his health problem. Then it all just bang stopped, like he threw a switch. Never heard any more about it. Nobody went down there. Nobody's allowed to go down there.
And at that time, at exactly that time, when John Kerry had gone there, Buzz Aldrin went in November or something, the summer months, I heard from whistleblowers that one of the alien presences had returned or was returning or was coming back into Antarctica, and we had started clearing out forces. I would love to be able to present proof, but what if that is what happened?
Well, Buzz did say one thing, and it just stuck in my head. It's the way he said it. He just said, we thought out things we shouldn't. And I went, what do you mean by that? I was in Antarctica for 2 months, January and February. Coldest part of the time. I'm down there in 1973 for the United States Navy. That's a great place to test probes that you're going to send to Mars. Or we tested Viking Lander down there because it's about 110 degrees below zero at the coldest. And if you think that's cold, Mars can be 250 below zero. So you put your machines out there and they run, and we'll see if they freeze up or lock up, and got to fix things. And so it's a great place to test. That's why I was there. But I'm telling you, that's a hostile world, y'all. I'm in a special suit. My Master Chief takes a can of water and throws it up in the air, and it sounds like cellophane on cigarette paper, and it freezes solid and hits the ground. I go, God almighty. And he said, don't get out that suit. You'll live about 2 minutes. I don't plan on to. So it's incredibly isolated. It's beautiful, but it's like Buzz once said on the moon, magnificent desolation. But let me ask something here, and y'all can help me out if I understand this right. The ice has started melting due to global warming for whatever reasons that is, and it finally melted down enough where the satellites passed over and you saw the pyramid, correct?
Say that again?
Not entirely, because one of the mysteries in Antarctica is that the East Antarctic area continues to build up ice, even if the West is melting.
Yeah, it's true. The Earth's name wasn't always Earth. It was called Snowball, if you look it up. And we were covered in ice over the entire planet, and the rotation of us going around the sun, the moon going around us, back and forth, the friction finally thawed us out, and we got our world we know today. But at the poles, they're kind of not facing on the sides, they're facing up and down, so they're not going to be affected by the gravitational tides like that to enough where they're going to melt. But global warming entered the picture, and it thinned the ice down enough where you could see this image, and one way or another they found this pyramid down there. And then that started me thinking, I don't know if I've never been down there, so I haven't seen any aliens or anything on board in the pyramid, whatever. But think about this a minute. If all this happened and unfolded the way they did, then if Buzz saw something, and I don't know what it was, but it was enough to give the man a heart attack. So if there are beings down there, I would think these beings never planned on us. They've been there, they came in millions of years ago. They've been under ice for millions of years. I don't think they were expecting us.
Well, let me bring one more element into it that Linda touched upon,
Yes.
and Michael Salla can talk about the Nazi connection. What is the...
Alan, just before,
Yeah.
and then it is that the whistleblowers themselves in the last 2 years suggested this to me, not as fact, but as inside scuttlebutt speculation. That there literally have been discussions that Antarctica 34 to 33 million years ago began to be plunged under ice because an alien intelligence or intelligences knew how to do this in order to have a huge, massive part of the Earth that the alien presence, could put off limits to humans, essentially camouflaging and hiding themselves under thick ice deliberately because they can sustain, with technology we don't understand, 68 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit in these huge, gigantic rooms with walls that glow. Everything is self-activating software. And so it means in a strange way that aliens that may have been interacting going back to 2 million years ago in the genetic manipulation to create Homo erectus, that they could have had a base, quote unquote,
Right.
at the South Pole to hide from their experiments.
Right, and if you want to hear more, Linda's YouTube channel goes into detail. But what is the Nazi connection down in South America, Michael? And how did they get there, and how did they know there was a place to go?
Well, the Germans were actually guided to Antarctica. They were given information about these hidden passageways under the Antarctic ice sheets from a group of extraterrestrials that may have been in Antarctica for a very long time. This information came from William Tompkins, who actually worked for the Navy during the Second World War and was part of this espionage program where they got a lot of intelligence on what the Germans were doing throughout the Second World War, and they found out that the Germans had this escape plan, and actually throughout the war were moving a lot of men, a lot of equipment down to Antarctica through these hidden passageways under the ice sheets, where they sent these very large submarines loaded with equipment, loaded with men, to these naturally formed caverns under the ice sheet, which were thermally heated, and there they built out these bases, these very large bases, where they were able to complete the production of their flying saucer designs, and that's the base for them actually being able to then launched themselves secretly as a major power after the Second World War, and the US Navy knew about this all the time, and it was only in the Antarctic summer of 1946 and 47 that the Navy had been able to actually send a fleet down there to basically find the Germans and to flush them out.
Well, were the Germans talking about what your whistleblowers found, Linda? Is that connected there?
It is such a puzzle because the whistleblowers themselves, Spartan 1 and this other SEAL that I don't have on video but has helped me for over a year, and says that what Spartan 1 is saying is true, but the issue about the Nazis and the technology. Now, the context that I heard back in would have been all the way back to somewhere in the 90s, was from a man that I was able to interview at his home who had worked for the CIA, but his cover was teaching cryptoanalysis at an army base that was in southeastern United States, and he said there was one entire building. He made me promise that I would never say in public the name of this base, and I've honored it to this day, and this is the reason why. He says the Central Intelligence Agency has continued all of these decades, has a building that they actually closed and blackened the windows at the back of a base that's otherwise military, and that it has been one of the heartbeats for analyzing autopsy footage, technology, all kinds of things related to extraterrestrials and UFOs at this particular base. And that it was there that the whole question that he got to go to Area 51. He walked the paths. He was in Papoose Mountains. He was with colonels. He was with people from the CIA and the Air Force. And he said they get into this huge, huge underground like a hangar. And there's a Vril craft, V-R-I-L. That was what was made in Peenemünde, Germany, in the far northeastern corner. And our government was confused about who was the maker of the Vril in World War II. And this CIA man said his understanding through the CIA was that the Vril, V-R-I-L, is what is in the photographs that you can go on the web and you can see them hovering. And that their understanding was it was direct extraterrestrial collaboration, not only with the plans of how to build them, but there was ET collaboration on the creation of the Vril craft and then the famous bell. And it is the bell that echoes through all of the whistleblowers that I'm dealing with that relate to portals, and that we are in a technology that is being described more and more in physics journals and goes to the heart of how extraterrestrials, if they came from Aldebaran to the Earth, for whatever influence that they want and work through Hitler and that war, they could go back and forth between Aldebaran and their portal on the Earth in Germany, Antarctica, South America, like that.
Pole to pole.
Pole to pole. And now,
An
Richard,
incredible
tell the Richard Byrd story.
Well, this is really fascinating, and the first time I met Michael Salla, we were on the set for Ancient Aliens, and we were both interviewing for the new Berlin base, and it's here in red, the new Schwabenland. What's interesting about this map, it was commissioned by National Geographic in 1987, and it says New Schwabenland on it. So it is a recognized area, and it's also USSR and West Germany. What I found is the Germans never left this area. Even after the war, they stayed there. And a lot of the confrontation with Operation High Jump and the Argus explosions and nuclear explosions in the Southern Ocean, which is still a classified operation to this day, including Operation High Jump. You can't even get Freedom of Information Act on this.
You mean there's Nazi Germans still in that area?
Well, I don't know if they go by Nazis anymore, but the German bases are still there.
Yeah, maybe I can clarify there. One of the things that Bill Tompkins emphasized was that the Germans that went down to Antarctica, these were nationalists. These were aligned with the German Navy. And the German Navy and German military intelligence were really hostile to the Nazis. I mean, Admiral Canaris, who was the head of naval intelligence for the Germans, was actually killed by Hitler. He was basically set up in a trial and murdered because Canaris had all the time had been helping the German nationalists set up these facilities in Antarctica. And as the war progressed, the Nazis became more and more desperate for the technologies that the Antarctic Germans had developed. And the Antarctic Germans said, no, we're not going to give it to you. And the Nazis said, why? And it was like, well, we don't believe in your program. And so they just continued to build at the base, and they believed that what the Nazis had set up was going to fail, and they proved correct. So they moved all of their resources to Antarctica so that when the Nazi Germany collapsed, then they immediately began negotiations with the US. And Admiral Byrd, this is not well known, but in 1945, 1946, the summer, Admiral Byrd went to Antarctica conducting negotiations with the Antarctic Germans because they greatly respected Admiral Byrd, because he was there to he was the guest of honor for the launch of Captain Richter's expedition in 1937-38.
Well, David, why don't you jump in there?
Well, I was just listening intently, and I was just thinking back to talking Buzz. I think I know why Buzz is so upset now. You have alien beings that may have been there for thousands or even millions of years, right?
Yeah.
Okay, modern man's only been around for 5,000 years. So when they showed up, we weren't even around. They weren't expecting us. And then the first encounter they get of us is Nazis. God almighty. So what kind of impression do they have of us? It's not Nazi Germany. So whatever their agenda is, I'm sure it's not going to jive with the agenda of Nazis, at least I hope not. So there's going to be a conflict there. So now they may feel, if I'm an alien commander and we came in and I wake up and I see this whole race of people I don't know and they run around with these swastikas on their arms and like, man, this is a crazy bunch of beings here. So they're going to go on a defensive and be more hostile. And I think that's what worried Buzz so much, because whatever it is down there, it's not friendly, it's hostile. Maybe it's got a reason. I didn't know that they were entertaining Nazi Germany at the time. So that impression would be not good.
But what we need is a timeline. I wish we had a blackboard, because if 34 million years ago is when an alien presence decided that they were going to build on the Antarctic continent and then cover it with ice, go to 2 million years, that would be 32 million years later is the first time that Homo erectus stands up in Africa. So we are a crossfade with Neanderthalensis 45,000 years ago. So if you come up from us, that means that the non-humans were in Antarctica 34 to 33 million years ago. They knew everything that was happening, and they would likely be the genetic manipulators of the evolving primate.
See, that's the thing that we have a tendency to do with alien encounters. We give them so much power, so much knowledge. They're omni, they know everything. They got Murphy Law up their butts as bad as we do. They make mistakes, they don't know what they're doing, and they're fumbling around with a lot of stuff, and things break down. And, you know, things get messed up. And so they land here, they see a bunch of monkeys running around, and then when they finally meet us again, they go, oh, these monkeys have turned into Nazis. You know? And I thought, not much of a leap.
Wait, but let me ask Mike, you said they actually weren't Nazis there, or were they a faction?
Yeah, they were German nationalists. Hitler was not allowed into Antarctica. Hitler was given basically safe refuge in Argentina and Colombia. So they did allow Hitler to survive the war. This was part of the deal, that Hitler and a lot of other Nazis would be given safe passage to South America, and they would basically live the rest of their lives in kind of like pleasant exile. But the German nationalists in Antarctica continued to work to complete their space program, to complete the construction of these spacecraft, these Vril craft, these Hannibal craft. There was the Hannibal series of craft that were built. And German Space Command was set up in Antarctica. There was a whistleblower, well, actually not a whistleblower, a researcher by the name of Vladimir Tuzinski. He worked with the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, and he was the first to release a lot of documents showing what was actually happening in Antarctica with the Germans. And he showed pictures which included German Space Command out of Antarctica. And so they were launching craft to the moon, to Mars, and this was where people first began learning that the German program out of Antarctica had successfully placed people on the moon and on Mars, and were continuing to basically explore the solar system. And all of that was conducted out of Antarctica.
Wait, I don't understand. Were there Germans still there when Buzz Aldrin showed up just a few years ago? Was that the same German continuum?
Well, the Germans have never left. Their bases are continuing operation to this day. Some are seasonal bases, some are permanent bases. But right now, there's only 1,000 people on that entire continent, and they're just like the skeleton crew of the bases that stay year-round. This is the 5th largest continent of the world, and there's 1,000 humans on it. So you can tell how desolate it is. But the thing about Buzz Aldrin, that there was this very cryptic tweet that came out during his stay down there. He said, "We have seen the faces of evil, and we're all in danger." Right. And this is right before he had his heart attack. And I can tell you, logistically, to do a medical evacuation from the interior of Antarctica is very difficult and very expensive. So something must have majorly gone wrong with Buzz.
And that was December of 2017, I believe.
Right.
And in the work that I have done about the missing National Science Foundation scientists, and that goes to the work I've done with the naval flight engineer who was there in a C-130 crew that was assigned to take in 12 or 15 scientists with a whole C-130 full of gear. And they went to Marie Byrd Land, which on that map, if McMurdo is down here on the west side, Marie Byrd Land is here.
Wait, you're saying on this map, where would it be?
Here is where the missing National Science Foundation is right. If you guys can see here, and here's McMurdo, and we're talking about East Antarctica over here, probably Beardmore Glacier, as being where some kind of an alien intelligence has had some kind of presence, structures, craft, everything for at least, let's say, 34 million years.
But you know, before you get to that, why don't we finish the whole German Nazi thing and talk about the black sun and how that relates to what your whistleblowers discovered, and then we can get to the missing scientists, right?
Well, to underscore the fact that when the C-130 crew had dropped them off, they disappeared. And then when they went to try to find them, there was nothing at the National Science Foundation camp at all. Nothing
They were
moving.
gone, a dozen
totally
scientists.
Gone. And when they did show up, they had been missing for a couple of weeks. And Brian S. and the C-130 flight crew were then sent back. And they were expecting that they would see this group of scientists out to meet their plane, doing this, yelling, something. And he said they were lined up like birds on a wire. They were all kind of next to each other, and most of them had their heads down, looking at their feet when the C-130 was pulling up. And somebody had to go from the flight crew over to the scientists and direct them to get onto the plane. And they talked about how not one single scientist said one word. Most of them walked with their looking down at the ground. Brian said when they got them loaded up, he said to his flight chief, "What in the world? Where have they been?" And the flight chief said, "I don't know. We can't get a word out of them." And during the flight, Brian went and sat down next to one of the scientists, and he said he leaned over and touched the scientist's knee, and the man never looked up. And he said, it was as if we were dealing with 12 or 15 people who had suffered post-traumatic shock syndrome, that they were unnaturally frozen in their position and no speaking, and that they all looked afraid. And the question is, if Buzz Aldrin had a heart attack, that's a leap of speculation because of what he saw and was exposed to in one of these underground facilities that my whistleblower Spartan 1 has described, then was that hole, the big hole in the ice near Pole, where those scientists went, and did they meet face to face with the non-humans that have been variously described as hairless humanoids, to something so strange that one of the SEALs that I have talked to that is not in the video said that as they walked for a mile or 2 miles into these very strange created architectures, they reached a point where something started coming through the walls out into the air. At first, it would go in and out of visibility, and then they realized that their minds were being manipulated. And then when they could see it clearly, and it was coming in and out like a television signal in the air, it appeared to be covered with scales, like an armadillo, the surface of an armadillo. And he said, when you are face to face with something like that, and you are trained in military to kill, but you're dealing with something you've never seen, and it can go in and out of visibility, and you know that your mind is being taken over by something that you are fighting. He said that happened in one of those corridors, and that was 2012.
So those scientists were severely traumatized, and
Yes.
they never come forward as a whistleblower, none of them. Oh, David, did you?
Actually, that makes total sense to me. Once again, if I was the alien commander, whatever, and we've been there for millions of years, wake up, see this human monkey race that's turned into Nazis, from that point on, I'd do a lockdown. I'd start mind sweeping everybody's brains out there, put them in neutral, and park them out there like penguins looking down at the snow. And I'd start locking the place up, and I would start going into a more hostile mode. And I wish when they first woke up, they met you people. That would have been a real jump. Because he wouldn't be concerned about Nazis, he'd be more concerned about gosh, maybe I should treat people better, you know. And I'm serious. I wish they would have met y'all first. But first impressions are big deals, even with alien races. So they come out of their slumber of lockdown, whatever, and they meet this, and things have went haywire on this planet from what they were familiar with. So my mission plan has changed. So I'm going to have to adjust. And whenever I've been in command for years in the Navy, and whenever your command shifts like that, you're going to have to make adjustments. And most times it's not for the good. It's negative stuff you're trying to deal with. And if the Nazi thing's got any truth to it all, which I think makes total sense, because now the circumstances with the scientists and all this stuff, this is somebody trying to defend themselves, and they're caught off guard. Murphy Law has come and bit them too. So they're trying to figure out what to do next. And it's not a good situation. You know, it sounds like to me it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. You're going to have to deal with this, because they can't maintain their present agenda, whatever it was going to be. So now they modified it. Now they're going to interact with us, and you'll have a waiting time period, which is about where we are now. And knowing our government, God help, the next wave they're going to meet is black ops. You know, if I was the alien commander, I'd declare war on you, because, you know, it's nothing but hostiles they're meeting. I'm serious. I wish they met y'all. They'd be looking to do a picnic. Instead, they're on defensive mode. And the only thing they're going to meet from here on out is going to be negative forces from us. This is not good, y'all, because whenever you take a stick and beat something a whole lot bigger and badder than you, well, then it comes back and tears your arms off, and you go, what happened? You know, this is not a good situation. I wish they had these people down there talking to them, and we wouldn't have to be worried about this.
Exactly. Thank you. Michael, yeah.
One of the things that I think is important to emphasize is that NASA was set up under German control, that in the 1950s deals were made with the Germans in Antarctica, where there would be technology sharing, and the Germans in Antarctica would give the US administration, the Eisenhower administration, technical and scientific assistance in reverse engineering some of the extraterrestrial craft. And in return, the Eisenhower administration would funnel a lot of resources, a lot of manpower and funding to the German space program in Antarctica. And the cover for all of this was the Apollo program. And the way they did it was they set Germans up who had been brought over under Operation Paperclip to run the Marshall Space Flight Center, which was actually in charge of the Apollo program. And the Marshall Space Flight Center was run by Germans who were former Nazi officers, Werner von Braun and his deputy, and the whole team of German paperclip scientists were put down there at the Marshall Flight Center to run the Apollo program. And also you actually had, at the Kennedy Space Center, you had Kurt Debus, who was another Nazi official, who was put in charge of the launching facility for the Apollo program right throughout the 1960s and 70s. And all of the funding for the Apollo program, $22 billion a year, was actually a smokescreen for putting man on the moon. Because what was really happening was that they were funneling a lot of money that the CIA had getting through all their illicit processes through NASA down to the German program in Antarctica to help the Germans to get not to the moon, well, they got there, but also to Mars and beyond. So in my book, that's the latest book that's out there, the US Air Force Secret Space Program and Space Force, it basically says, my argument is that while the Apollo program got Germans, while the Apollo program got Americans to the moon, it got the Germans to Mars and Alpha Centauri.
Brad, yeah.
And
Thank you.
just to follow up with what Michael said, the Apollo program was just a cover for the real technology that was in the secret space program. Much of that funneled out of Germany just before the war to these bases, Point 11 New Berlin base, which Admiral Dolan said, we have created an impregnable fortress for the Fuhrer in 1943. And that is presumed to be this New Berlin base in New Schwabenland. Also, when I was in South America, I was discovering that there are still these massive tracts of land in Chile and Argentina where also some of these scientists and laboratories could have gone. And what's so interesting in all this, and what also Spartan 1 has talked about, that in this big craft is the black sun.
Right. Talk about that, Linda, because it gets even weirder, right?
Yeah, it's a lot weirder.
Yeah, and one of the most fascinating things in doing research into the history of the black sun, you can get it back into Mesopotamia. It is associated in Sanskrit with something that would sound like they are describing the soul, the animus of the body container.
Can you describe what it looks like?
Yeah. Ring, 12 arms coming out. At the end of each 12, two 90-degree angles. There's the first one. There's the second one. And each of the 12 arms has the two 90-degree angles. And so you have this image like that.
And they found this in these underground structures.
And these were carved by Spartan 1's testimony. They were carved on the inside of the installation, and he had been briefed that what he would be encountering were 23-foot high doors, 18 feet thick. All he had to do was put his index finger on the outside and touch, and the entire 18 by 23 massive basalt would move. He would go through, it would close, he would turn around, and there would be the 23-foot by, I think it was 17 feet wide, black basalt with, up here was the black sun, and down here was a star map. And the star map was being studied by an astronomer that was also, they had scientists there in addition to the language people. And the astronomer told Spartan 1 that one of the doors, they had taken the pattern, put it into a computer program for analysis, and it had produced information that there were 3 focal points in this one particular star map below a black sun, and that the 3 focal points, when they went to Hubble, it became a Hubble project to do a reality check on this. And Hubble, when they took the photographs of Hubble and they did the overlays and all of these things and found these 3 focal points, they concluded one was at the center of the Milky Way galaxy, and the other 2 were in a geometric relationship to what they said were 2 universes outside of this universe. This is very hard to wrap our heads around, but just hang in there for a second, because as I continued to investigate the histories of the black sun and all of the related subjects to it, a man who is a physicist in England a month and a half ago or 2 sent me an email with an attachment that looked like the black sun. Not 12 arms, there were 18, but it was the same 2 90-degree angles at the end. And he said, consider the possibility that this new physics symbol, arms with 2 90-degree angles, and here is what it stands for in modern 2019 physics. If you accelerate an electric charge to the speed of light, it instantaneously turns into a sphere. And that pattern represents that in physics today. What if the black sun has always been an alien intelligence's representation of the network of portals throughout the Milky Way galaxy and beyond, and that this is how they move through the cosmos?
Wow.
Yeah.
David, does that make sense to you?
I was taking it all in. I was drawing and painting in my head as she was talking, and Linda just knows all this stuff is so cool. But
with the space technology.
I have a hard time sleeping tonight after listening to you for a while. I can't get my brain to slow down. To answer your question, on a fundamental particle level, yes. Yeah. Lots of times, especially when I have built, God, I can't even count them all, vacuum chambers. I had a vacuum chamber one time the size of this entire room. And I am firing particles in there, and I'm charging them to the speed of light, and they crash. And what's interesting, always when they always break at 90 degrees. Did you know that?
No.
They always break. And you was going, I was sitting up here doing this while you were talking, and I'm going, I've seen that before in the vacuum chambers. And never really understood why. We just take it as a phenomenon. We in science, if we don't know something, it's a phenomenon. And but
you could see the black sun.
That's the first time I ever thought, my God, maybe there's a black sun at work in there. And in my vacuum chamber, I can represent different time periods of the planet at will. And no matter what time period I'm in, they always break 90 degrees.
If you could see the black sun, would you make more sense of that based on that physics?
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be like, see, I always complain, I get in arguments with colleagues, that they tell me, here's the periodic table. That's it, end all of everything. There's nothing else in the universe. And I'm going, could it be we have half a volume and the encyclopedia set runs off the end of the table?
Right.
You know, and how arrogant, tell me something like that. You know, there are things out there. There's probably a dilithium crystal out there. Some guy's running around powering his craft with it. We don't know yet, but for just to shut down and say that's the end all of everything, the black sun may be real. Next time when I go to the Middle East, I'll be building another vacuum chamber. I will run a test, see if I can find a black sun.
Good.
Wow. So what did you find, Brad?
Well, and with the 90-degree angle, that makes perfect sense, and that it can be replicated in a laboratory. But it's the occult symbolism of the black sun being replicated in this age-old ship. Maybe the Nazis found it first, and then that became one of their symbols of their occultism.
You mean the swastika? It was
Even before that. I mean, this is even a deeper. This is like the inside symbol, where the swastika was like the outside symbol.
The black, you try to look. This is fascinating because I spent maybe an accumulation of 5 days going everywhere on the web, in old encyclopedias, in books, in everything, trying to find any photograph from World War II that would show the SS and Hitler with the black sun. If it exists and you can find it, please let me know. I could not find anything that had them all in one scene. It was as if Himmler, who I think Himmler probably made the decisions about the black sun as a symbol that would represent the SS. It is a German name that's Staffelstaffel, or I have a hard time pronouncing it, but it's the SS. And they were designed to be an intimidating and brutal security force for Hitler, and it was Himmler who chose the black sun to represent them. Now, here is a classic example of something that had a history that went back to Mesopotamia, and it was not associated with brutal security forces in Mesopotamia, but they reached back from Germany to get that for some reason that I personally, this is just a personal opinion from all of the material I have been swamped in for the last several months. I think they were dealing with full-blood ETs. I'm just going to say, I think that Maria Orsic and those blondes were associated with an extraterrestrial presence that was interfacing directly with some of the German power structure. and that I think they had portal abilities to go back and forth to different places, and that when Maria Orsic, who was head of the Vril Society, disappeared during the war, I bet she ended up back on a planet in Aldebaran. I can't prove any of this. But what I think and speculate is that the black sun in Mesopotamia was there because extraterrestrials, full-blood extraterrestrials, were the Anunnaki and the Sumerians. And that means that in the 20th century, at the time, as a DIA guy told me, quote unquote, World War II was an extraterrestrial war between competing, fighting extraterrestrial civilizations fought through human bodies, close quote. And if that's true, and if a lot of the wars going back through to Sumeria, and I think Anunnaki was real, I do not think it's mythological, that there have been warring extraterrestrials throughout this solar system, and that the black sun was probably a technology representation that was used by one or more. It was there. The current ETs interfacing with Hitler during World War II knew all about that. They were influencing the development of the Vril, and they had some relationship to the black sun, and they inspired or told Himmler to use it. And that is how all of that came about, allegedly in human terms in World War II. I think the biggest influencers were alien intelligences.
Well, go ahead. Yeah, thank you.
Man, I'm glad you're sitting down. Wait till you hear this. You know, I have this crazy memory. It's eidetic, and I remember things. And when you're coming out of a heart condition, you ramble, you got medications, and they're messing you up. But Buzz said something, it was a phrase, and he was just staring out the window when he said it, and I remembered it, but it didn't make any sense. Until you just said all this, and I went, holy smokes. You know Buzz fought in World War II, right? You know, he was in the conflict. And this may not mean anything at all, or might really be significant, but he said they're back and we're going to do it all over again.
They're back.
They're
back, and they're going to do it all over again.
And it's the way he said it, it's just like, it's how he said it. It's just like somebody's been beat to death, you know, and can you believe it? We're going to do it all over again.
And that relates to what I was saying, that one of the possibilities the whistleblowers raised is that one of the alien intelligences that may not be very nice returned in 2017, and that when Buzz Aldrin went there, this is what they were worried about, is that something had come back and it was dangerous, and they had Carey and Aldrin and the Greek guy there for reasons that are not clear, but the whistleblower says that is exactly the time that the unmentionable returned.
Michael,
I just wanted to bring us back to this idea that the US Navy knew all along that the Germans were working with this reptilian extraterrestrial group called the Draconians, and that Bill Tompkins said that these Navy spies would come into the briefing room at Naval Air Station San Diego and would be embarrassed to be saying that, well, you know, we saw these beings, these reptilian consultants, giving all of this information to the Germans or to the Nazi SS in terms of how to build these craft, giving them instructions to go to Antarctica. And that's what happened. And the Navy knew about this all the time. And so that kind of gives us a framework for understanding what happened in the 1950s when agreements were made with the Germans, because the Navy was aware of this. And a decision was made that the Navy would continue to work with the human-looking extraterrestrials that helped the Allied powers win the Second World War, and that the Air Force would work with the Germans and their reptilian partners in Antarctica to try and get as much information as possible to build out their space program, because I think the Navy and the U.S. Navy has always been the custodian of the American Republic. They've been the ones that are the protectors, and they were the ones that made the decisions at the very beginning.
Michael, just for a second, do you mean that from your point of view, that the United States made a kind of schizophrenic bargain, that they would have the Air Force would be collaborating with the reptilians for technology gain, and the Navy would be collaborating with the humanoids and the hairless ones for allyship?
Exactly, yes. That was a strategic choice, and it actually makes sense. You see there are both two different factions of extraterrestrials that have been fighting each other for who knows how long, and so you basically set up an alliance system where you can learn and get as much as you could from each of those extraterrestrial entities, and try and build up your own space program so that you could one day maybe match them. And so the Navy went down one track, and this is what William Tompkins describes, that the Navy was actually working with these human-looking extraterrestrials that were planted into the Douglas Aircraft Company in the 1950s and planted into other aerospace companies in the 60s, that Tompkins says that basically were helping the Navy design these space battle groups for the future.
All blonde and blue-eyed, too.
That's right, yeah. Exactly.
And then on the other side was...
The Air Force was working with the Draconians and their Fourth Reich allies out of Antarctica, trying to get as much information as possible. So this is where you get the kind of German influence over the Air Force up until pretty recently, where they were really helping the Air Force get as much of this technology as possible. So I think this is what we've had, is almost like a schizophrenic relationship. And the US is unique because it is the only country in the world that I know of that has these different military services which are virtually autonomous. There's no other country in the world that has military services that are that separate and independent from one another. Every other country, you have one centralized defense structure because that's how you maintain loyalty. In the United States, and this was something that was the genius of the founding fathers, I guess, that set up this kind of system where you have the Army and the Navy and the Marines, and the Air Force was a much later creation. But each one was distinct and separate to each other and had a certain degree of autonomy. And then in 1947, with the creation of the Department of Defense, you had it enshrined in legislation where these different military branches would be independent of one another, except for the Marines and the Navy. They would be both under one department, the Department of the Navy. But the Army and the Air Force and the Department of the Navy are basically independent of one another.
And Michael, you may be describing why there is now an obsession about getting a space force for the United States to combine everything into an inertia, because something may not be friendly that we're going to have to face soon publicly, and that may be what forces that headline out. We are not alone in this universe. The Space Force.
Kind of explains why they want a space command. You know, you combine the forces, and there's, man, it's lock and load time. There's one thing I want to go back in our talks on von Braun. You can imagine with my life, everything. I knew von Braun personally, for years and years. I met him when I was 15. And I had won so many awards. It's a long story, but that's why. After about the 10th medal, he hung around my neck. He said, "What are you doing, child?" And I went, "I guess I'm a little busy." So we became friends, and he tested me one time. And I think y'all should hear this test. We just met the first day, and he's looking at me, and he says, he asked me, he said, "How tall are the doors on the VAB, the Vehicle Assembly Building, where you assemble rockets?" And I went, 475 feet. "How tall is the Saturn V fully stacked?" 367 feet. "Why is it so much taller then?" "Because you were getting ready, Dr. von Braun, build a fourth stage Saturn to go to Mars. And that's why they were built that way. And a lot of people don't know that. I have the blueprints of the fourth-stage Saturn at home. And it's, he was wanting to go to Mars. That's all he wanted to do. He wanted to go to the moon. He wanted to go to Mars. He didn't want to rain rockets down on people in England. But when they took him and the 125 scientists on his side, and then the other 135, and they had like 255 scientists, they brought all their families in. And they just gave them a simple choice at Peanut Monday, where they built the V-2 rockets. You'll work and build our rockets, or we shoot a member of your family every day until you start working. What are you going to do? You're going to work. When von Braun came into the United States, he was sitting in the hallway of the West Wing, and him and Obart and several of the others that was with the group, they were crying because they think that, yeah, they were crying because they believe they're going to be murdered. You know, they were captured by us. We brought them over, and the secretary, you know, letter typing secretary, went by and saw the men weeping. She went into Eisenhower's office. It was his secretary. She chewed him out. Go out there and do something about that. You know, we're not like that. And so they went out there and calmed them down and everything. And they sent them to White Sands, New Mexico. And we sent the captured V-2 rockets there, and we named them Bumpers. And they started work out there. And that's how we ended up out in White Sands, New Mexico with our rocket scientists, because how are you going to tell a war-weary nation that you just brought in 125 scientists that built weapons that killed over 200 million people worldwide? You're not going to tell them. So that's how that whole thing started. But von Braun was the nicest guy I ever knew. And when he left the space program and he died a few years after, I'll guarantee you, he had bad stomach and ulcers, but he died of a broken heart. Wow. Because he was so heartbroken through the whole thing. He just didn't want to live anymore, and I really was.
What broke his heart specifically?
Pardon?
What broke his heart specifically?
Not getting to go to the moon and going on to Mars. They shut down the space program, basically. You know, that was the first shutdown in 1970. Well, in 71, by 71 we were closing down. 75 we had Skylab, and then we shut down for a period of about 6-7 years before we started back up with the space shuttles. And now you have shut down again, and this time it's permanent. You know your manned space program is gone, right? U.S., you don't have one. You know the pads 37A and B that you launched the shuttles from? Look at them on Google. They're big slabs of concrete. They cut all the towers down and sold it for scrap iron.
Well,
Everything's gone.
Well, Dan, did Wernher von Braun ever say to you that he knew that there was ancient archaeology on Mars that matched the archaeology inside the moon, that matched the archaeology in Antarctica?
Not with Antarctica, but he referred to the ancients of this planet. There's relics that he believed that were here and that we'd find their matches on Mars. And that's why he wanted to go so bad.
Well, the whistleblowers say that they have seen the photographic match, that from photos that we have taken, apparently, I assume Cydonia, but I'm not sure.
Right.
That the archaeology, the symbols, the hieroglyphs on Mars match hieroglyphs that we have accessed in some way from inside the moon and in a site on the backside of the moon, and that it matches the hieroglyphs and symbols deep under the ice in Antarctica.
Unfortunately, von Braun passed away before all that came out. I would like for him to live long enough to see it. But as far as the backside of the moon, I've got an answer for that. When I get to the Middle East and we start up, I have a series of probes, and we're all landing on the backside. And it'll be real time. You'll be able to see the photo. You'll see the videos. So let's go back there and see what's going on back there. You know.
Yeah.
Well,
yes.
Well, probably they think I'm a voyeur or something. Whoever lives there, but we're going to go take a look. And the 12 landing sites I've picked are the 12 landing sites that NASA said you're not supposed to go to on those moon bases tapes, those old ones. I'm going to every one of those sites. Let's go see what that stuff is.
well, let's get back to that Space Force discussion, because I want to understand if you said, Linda, that the Navy and the Air Force are now sort of joining forces because there's something, this is your hypothesis, something that we haven't expected is showing up now, starting in 2017. What do you think that could be?
I'm going to keep it in politically acceptable boxes. I am going to say, let your mind roam back 5,000 or 6,000 years and think of the old ancient texts about gods that may never have been gods. They may have been the full-blood ETs that made Antarctica, and that there was conflict then as there is now, and the issue is which of those gods representing which ET civilization came back in 2017, or some semblance of it, and why, and what allies. Now the whistleblowers, so you do not feel panic, you do not feel fear about this. It's my understanding that our allies that are not human are really helping us right now. But we all need to be able to stand up and face the facts that something's out there in the cosmos don't like all life in the universe, and our particular Earth, probably because of competing civilizations at the time of the Anunnaki and way before, going back at least 270 million years and probably 500 million, that there have been these waves and waves and waves of extraterrestrial civilizations on this planet. Someday we will know this. So that whatever the ancient conflicts have been, and the residues are now, whatever could come back, we have strong allies. So this means if we could be told all the truth, we probably would have to redesign and look at all of our ancient history and religions through completely different lenses. But it never means that there is not a divine field and that there are alien intelligences who respect that as much as we do, and they are trying to help us. And that is the ground I'm standing on in the work that I do, and I hope you will too.
Yeah, okay. All right. Dave, and then we'll just, you had a comment, David?
Yes, I do. I might be able to help you out here. I can give you a current example. When you get a chance, write this down, y'all. Note this. Look up July 23rd, 2012. Are you familiar with that? There's some heads nodding out there. Check it out. It's all going to be hard facts up to the last moment, and I'm going to make a jump. Thanks to Linda, I will make the jump, and hopefully I'll land the same place you would land. On July 23rd, 2012, and by the way, this story was not released until 2 years later. But I knew about it because I'm the national spokesperson for the SHIELD Act. So, you know what happened July 23rd, 2012? We all should have died. Not one, not two, but 3 CMEs, each of them bigger than the Carrington event of 1869, were traveling in a row. These globs of plasma were bigger in size and weight and depth and density than Mount Everest. There's 3 of them. We've never seen 3 in a row before. It's a perfect storm. And it covers 93 million miles in 14 hours. That's fast, y'all. That's quicker than a Volkswagen. So anyway, they came here from 93 million miles away. They passed Earth so close, they passed between us and the moon. This is a fact. 110,000 miles away, they passed right by. They were heading dead center. If they had hit, game over. We all died. The first one would have stripped the Van Allen radiation belts. 2 and 3 would have had clear shots into the atmosphere. They've cascaded over the planet. And everything you ever heard about the event of a corona mass ejection would have happened. The entire planet would have incinerated from our electronics. Where's your power grid? 40 feet in the air. Every transformer would have detonated. They're full of oil. That's how they handle the heat. They become napalm everywhere. People on fire run down sidewalks, baby strollers on fire, just as bad as you could think. And then all the aircraft in the sky, over 500,000 people at any one time, they all come down. You can't restart the engines. They crash in the hospitals, schools, churches, you know, this building. It's been just unbelievably bad. I can't make it so bad for you.
So what happened?
Well, here's what happens. Right before it hit us, and it's a phenomenon, something, and I can't ever get a definition for something, bumped these things, and they just veered off and just glazed by us. Now, that started me thinking. People like you make me think all the time now. So I said, hey, if they had hit us on July 23rd, and you go 6 months ahead, all vegetation life is gone. The last human being or last animal would have died, and that date would have rolled up to be December 22nd, 2012. They were right. Not bad for a group of people who don't even have a computer.
And Dan Adair, that is one of the big secrets that I have been told to keep secret. That, but you just outlined something that was described to me 5 years ago by a physicist who was involved in exactly that there was going to be this kind of ejection from the sun, and the same thing happened, and it's in my Spartan 1 and 2, the part 3, where they knew, because they are inside of the military that are in interstellar trade routes and know all about ETs and all of that. They had firsthand information that it was just 2 years ago, something very similar to what you just said, that there was going to be another huge solar prominence that was going to interact with our planet, and this was also in the winter. I'm trying to remember the headlines, I think, were in that November-December period of 2017. And they said that they know that this was shown in photographs, that one of our allies came into the solar system that is collaborating with us in interstellar trade, parked itself out at Saturn. I don't understand the physics, and you could explain it.
Yeah.
But they parked themselves out at Saturn. Maybe they sent ships to the sun, probably, I have no idea. But that they stopped a prominence that was going to do what you just described, because the physicist said, leading up, back in 2012, if that had not been blocked, then that whole idea of the Mayan calendar coming to an end and an apocalypse.
Well, they hit it on the head. And
this is the first time I've ever said this.
well, I just run around with this stuff, but it's
Wait, one more thing about, and I want to get Brad and Michael in here, but the 2017 date, when something shows up, could that be why the New York Times released that article about the Nibbits and all of this coming public as a kind of movement towards disclosure, because something has shown up in our reality that has made a presence?
Alan, that may be a 2 + 2 = 4 that none of us have really thought about until this moment, because these are pieces that are coming together that we all should see in a big pattern, and I wouldn't be surprised if that isn't the case.
And there's the reason why it was Jupiter. Jupiter is a Jovian giant.
No, Saturn.
Oh,
Saturn's ring.
It's also the second largest one, but between Jupiter and Saturn, do you remember when Jupiter got hit by Shoemaker Levy 9?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for Jupiter, we'd been toast long ago. the Saturn and Jupiter both pulls in things in our solar system, pulls them and crashes them into us. Shoemaker-Levy 9 was heading straight for Earth, and the gravity field of Jupiter pulled it in. Now, if you're going to make orbital changes as trajectories at Earth, I would do it somewhere between Jupiter and Saturn. And that's because there's a longitudinal, it's an angularization problem mathematically. It's the best place to do it using the least amount of energy. And so that's where these things got bumped. These 3 CMEs was out there. And so maybe one of your friends is out there in a big ship, and that'd be a good place to park it. And one other footnote, look it up. Where was the United States government on July 23rd, 2012? No, it was a little, the federal government has an open house picnic at Mount Weatherby for Congress and its families. Those bastards were out there sitting in Mount Weatherby getting ready to close the doors, and they're going to let us burn.
Wow.
Underground, huge facility there for the government people.
Wow.
So your suspicions about the government, yeah, they're right, and a whole lot worse.
Okay, thank you, Brad. And why don't you jump in with that?
This is great.
Yeah, please talk about that.
Well, just back to Antarctica, I think the discussion also
Back
has
to Antarctica.
With Germany and their interaction with New Schwabenland. Michael and I have slides of some of the maps of New Schwabenland, including the access points under the ice. So any discussion of Germany and Antarctica has to include the U-boats. And we know that the Germans had very advanced U-boats.
What is a U-boat?
Well, it's an underwater boat. It's submarine in German terms. And Das Boot, the movie, was about U-boat pilots.
And what was the reason for that?
Well, that is how they were getting the equipment and the personnel down there. And this is very important because when all of the craft came out of Peenemünde and the Skoda Works, there was nothing there when the Allies and the Soviets rolled into Germany. They had done one of the biggest evacuations of some of the top personnel and all this equipment to this area of Germany, as well as South America bases, these large land holdings that are still private property and off limits.
Brad, do you think that all of those extraordinary constructions of these submarine bases 2 miles down, that the Navy SEAL that has been there says that they look like one big huge Lego, no cracks, no seams, no anything? Could the Germans have, with the Aldebaran help, been told to take submarines to what was already built, and that's why you would have a confluence of the Nazis using submarines to go into something that was already there by extraterrestrials?
That's exactly where I was going with this. Because if you look at the map, the under ice map, there are massive channels. If any caught my talk yesterday, I showed the lakes and the streams, and they all interconnect. And Michael and I also talk about the 91 active volcanoes in Antarctica, which would create these massive domes under the ice and geothermal features like the Schumacher Ponds, where they set up Point 211, the New Berlin base. So to find your way through these ice fields and get under there, and they could have had help. They could have been directed to get down there because it must have been very treacherous, very dangerous, and very dark. But if you know the way and you can get in there, you are talking about an impregnable fortress.
Especially what Linda's whistleblowers are saying.
Yes.
So, Michael, what do you say about the whole structure of the land and about as a base?
Well, we actually may know a tremendous amount of what's underneath Atlantis. There's a book that was written by Rand Flem-Ath and his wife Rose called Atlantis Under the Ice. And they make a really compelling case that Antarctica, what we know as West Antarctica, for a lot of its history was actually outside of the Antarctic Circle because of the crustal displacements that have occurred over the last 100,000 years. So when Plato talked about the last days of Atlantis, he was talking about this period just before the last crustal displacement or pole shift that occurred 9400 BC, and that Atlantis, which was this flourishing civilization that Plato described in great detail in his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, and the tremendous kind of geography and architectural designs that were used to build the Atlantean capital, all of that was basically moved through a pole shift that placed Antarctica down by the South Pole and led to the enormous ice sheet over North America. The North Pole was actually located in Hudson Bay, and North America, Nebraska, all of that was north of that was just one massive ice sheet. And this is something that Graham Hancock described in great detail, how the massive North American ice sheet basically dissolved around 9400 BC, which coincided with the end of the Younger Dryas period. So the Earth's oceans rose about 400 feet. So what Plato described was basically two things that happened. Well, there was a crustal displacement that moved Antarctica, the western Antarctica, close to the South Pole, because East Antarctica was always much closer to the South Pole, so that remained frozen and could have been frozen as much as 34 million years, as Linda is saying. But West Antarctica has been, for major periods of its history, ice-free, and so this, through the crustal displacement, was moved back down towards the South Pole, and it froze over. So Atlantis was flash frozen, and the oceans rose 400 feet. So all of a sudden, Atlantis, going from a temperate climate with this super civilization, was now under 400 feet of ice that was quickly flash frozen over it, and over the succeeding 11,600 years, you've had ice accumulate over West Antarctica, making it close to 2 miles thick. And we know from ice core samples that West Antarctica, the ice core samples are much younger than East Antarctica. In East Antarctica, the ice core samples date back millions of years. But West Antarctica, they're less than a few thousand years old. So the ice sheet in West Antarctica is relatively new, but East Antarctica, it's ancient.
And that could have caused the flood, but also 33 million years ago it was tropical, and it could have been at the equator when something could have hit the Earth and it spun to the South Pole.
You guys need to see the film that I showed 2 days ago. Probably a lot of you saw that. Very accurate Pangea has been worked out, and it's animation showing how it happened per 5 million years. And where Antarctica, the roundish land, is coming off of what we would call South Africa, it is bound up to other land as it's coming down. It takes 100 million years to get to the South Pole. Other land masses moved off that formed South America and others, but this was a track all the way down. And Michael, technically, in terms of pole shifts, the physics today says the last pole shift was 876,000 years ago. There have been periodic small magnetic anomalies in that 876,000 years. Not pole shifts, but there have been temporary large changes, like once or twice. I do not know if any like that happened 12,000 years ago. There was no pole shift 12,000 years ago. So whatever is that landscape of magnetic field anomalies, Wilkes Land on the east side of Antarctica is the largest, look this up you guys, it's fascinating to read. The largest magnetic anomaly on Earth is in Wilkes Land, Antarctica. the largest. It is so significant.
Where is that exactly? What-
Now, I'm going to go ahead and say this. I don't like to say things that I don't have some actual proof, but I think that the whistleblowers need to be heard.
And
And
Linda,
this,
just right offshore is the magnetic South Pole, and it is also moving off the continent now, too. It's in Commonwealth Bay, and just like the North Magnetic Pole is racing across the Arctic Ocean towards Siberia, that may have something to do with the magnetic anomaly.
and I'm going to throw this back to you just with this. I read a tremendous amount of literature written by geophysicists just in the last 10 years, all with huge mysteries, question marks about what is the Wilkes Land magnetic anomaly, and they're concluding that it must be an asteroid with a lot of iron and heaven knows what other kinds of metals, and that it penetrated deep into that land that is East Antarctica. It's not very far from the sea. So if you think on that map where you've seen McMurdo and then you go, you can't really say north, south, east, west in Antarctica. You have to look at maps and say, go to the right and find this latitude, longitude. But the whistleblower, Navy SEAL, said he was told specifically, no ifs, ands, or buts, that the Wilkes Land magnetic anomaly is actually a craft, a machinery, a technology, and it is really deep, and they don't know if it is deliberately functional exactly where it is for reasons related to all of the area near Beardmore that is ancient archaeology. And the implication also is that if they've got 62-acre sites where Spartan 1 walked, and that is in the Beardmore Glacier area, and Brad can tell you about what has been found there in terms of fossils. What would be between Beardmore Glacier and the Wilkes Land magnetic anomaly that we would only know by deep ice penetrating radar, no other way? And we may have answers, but nobody's talking.
Well, I want to respond to what you said, Linda, because I think it's important that people appreciate that when we try to understand, what is the history of Antarctica, there are three theories in terms of the positioning of Antarctica. One is the continental drift theory that Linda just explained, that Antarctica broke off from Pangaea millions of years ago and that it's in its present location and it's been there for millions of years and hasn't moved. The other is the Earth crustal displacement theory that Charles Hapgood proposed back in the 1950s, and it's important to emphasize that Albert Einstein thought that Hapgood's theory was very sound, and he supported it and wrote the foreword to the book and explained the mechanism by which the South Pole and the North Pole, geographical South and North Pole, actually move through the crustal displacement theory.
But scientists today don't accept it.
Can I finish, please? So they drift approximately 40 degrees for each pole shift. And the third theory, and we need to really consider this and not dismiss it, is the Earth expansion hypothesis, that there was never a supercontinent Pangaea. That's nonsense. That's just mainstream geology trying to kind of pull the wool over our eyes.
Together.
That the Earth itself was only approximately 60% of the size it once was.
Expanding Earth.
So it was 60% of the size of what it is presently. And over the succeeding millennia, or millions of years, the Earth has expanded slowly. And as it expands, and you can see it in terms of the mid-Atlantic ridge and the Pacific ridge, how the Earth has expanded. And mainstream geologists say, well, there's this subduction process where, yes, the Pacific ridge expands, but it all kind of moves under the plate over California. But in fact, this Earth expansion hypothesis is supported by some pretty competent geologists who say that this is actually a more accurate description of our history. So if the Earth expansion hypothesis actually is true, then we can appreciate that a place like Atlantis does move. that parts of it can be, for a period of time, near the South Pole, and other parts can move away.
Well, that makes
over
sense
periods.
to me because it looks like those continents are being ripped and stretched apart.
But you guys, that reinforces Pangea. That does not contradict. Pangea, by definition, is where the land masses were together. Whether the Earth expanded or it was just volcanic crap, it doesn't matter. Pangea is, they've even matched, they have matched layers in Africa to layers on the eastern side of South America. They were once upon a time joined exactly like a puzzle. That is Pangea. The land was together. Whether it is drift or whether it would be crustal expansion by what you just said, Pangea is where the land began expanding.
Well, actually, it's saying the same thing. What you call Pangea was Earth millions of years ago when it was only 60% of its present size. So, whether you call that arrangement Pangea or kind of like Earth.
You mean
like
before the oceans, in a way?
That's right, before the...
No, the water was there. The water was always around Pangea.
Well, if the Earth is expanding, well, anyway, let's include the audience in the part of this discussion. Does anyone, if anyone has a question about anything you've heard, go ahead, right? Well, if the microphone, if the line up there, yeah. Okay.
I have a question. You can hear me? Okay. I wondered if maybe Linda could comment on what I heard Emery Smith talk about. He seems to believe that the ice is melting on the west coast of Antarctica because that's where the volcanoes are. The 91 volcanoes are under the ice.
I think that probably, it will not say that there's direct cause and effect proved, but I have read science articles about the volcanoes being suspected of being part of the, we'll call it the ice melt on the west Antarctica, but there is increasing buildup of ice on the east side, on East Antarctica, and it is really truly a science mystery. Why is Eastern Antarctica building up at the same time? Well, the volcanoes, 91 volcanoes, and I think it's been with ice and ground penetrating radar that they have been able to map where they are and where the volcanoes are with heat coming up would explain some of the patterns of the melt on the West Antarctic side.
And literally, Antarctica, like the Rift Valley in Africa, is tearing itself apart. And this is what's creating the volcanoes, mostly along the Transantarctic Mountains. And this is where the Beardmore Glacier is.
Right.
And up on top of the Beardmore Glacier is Mount Buckley. And this is where they found fossils with ferns in them, of dinosaur bones. Some of those dinosaurs do correspond to the other continents as well, when they were all joined together. And then other dinosaur bones are unique to Antarctica entirely, including this giant salamander that was found at the Beardmore Glacier. So it does show that there was very exotic and very tropical climates on this continent at one point.
And Beardmore is, for those of you, if you go to a map and you look at the Beardmore Glacier, you will be in an area that is fascinating, and that is not far from the latitude, longitude of where Spartan 1 went down in the black octagon structure.
You guys do know that volcanoes will cause extreme magnetic deviations. And what do you got down there? Extreme magnetic deviations.
But I do not think that there is any volcanic activity described in any of the nature science papers on the Wilkes magnetic anomaly. It's not associated.
Yeah, you're right. No, you're right about that.
Totally different.
This is a Transantarctic mountain. Beardmore Glacier is right about in the middle of it. Mount Buckley's right up on top. I should also say that the first explorers going to the South Pole, Shackleton and Scott, went up the Beardmore Glacier. Shackleton didn't make it all the way. Scott was 35 days behind Amundsen, who came from this direction, One of the reasons the Scott expedition failed is because they loaded up with all these glaciers that they were going to take, fossils that they were going to take back, glaciers, whatever, that they were going to take back to the British Academy of Sciences, and it weighted them down, and they couldn't move any further.
So where's East Antarctica versus...
All of this.
This is, and where's
the
West? Oh, that's...
Yeah.
And where they meet, there's a kind of mountain range, right?
Correct.
And
And you go to the Trans-Antarctic Mountains, that is a huge divider.
between...
And all of this, it goes all the way. McMurdo is where the U.S. has their base, and this is the Ross Sea. And this entire mountain chain goes all of the way up and over here. And Beardmore Glacier is right there, and it's huge. And now, on this side, this is East Antarctica. And it is, in many ways, so radically different than West Antarctica. And the volcanoes are in patterns that I have seen on a map, that some of the volcanoes, here are some mountains here. The volcanoes are 2 miles, I think they're 2 miles down on the average, and they are now making patterns of heat over here that physicists are studying, because it appears that's what's melting this ice, perhaps accelerating.
And your guys saw the UFOs over where exactly?
Beardmore Glacier, right here.
That's where...
And this whole area, the vast East Antarctic continent, the ice is building up even during global warming and the melting of West Antarctica, and it is a huge mystery.
Well, okay. Let's take another question.
It seemed like you guys were about to talk more about what went wrong in 2017 and Space Force, and then the 2012 Mayan calendar theory came in, which is great. But what went wrong in 2017? Is it we decided to stop Draco and the Air Force had us falling out, or is it a third thing? Is it...
Well, like...
Yeah, maybe
go
I
ahead.
can address that. Yes, there was a falling out. Basically, the Air Force discovered that the Navy had developed a secret space program that was far more advanced than the Air Force had in its possession. So the Navy had built out these space battle groups, and they had 8 of these space battle groups deployed in deep space, which is called, that program is called Solar Warden. And the Air Force didn't know that that actually was a real program. They thought it was disinformation. But then in 2017, the Air Force, when these whistleblowers came forward, William Tompkins, Corey Good, and Pete Peterson and a few others started to talk about the Navy having these kinds of craft, the Air Force started to investigate that and found out that it was real, that there really was a Navy space program, and that the Navy had built this secretly with the help of human-looking extraterrestrials. And so the Air Force felt betrayed, because they were told that they had the cutting-edge technology, that the Germans and the reptilians in Antarctica were giving the Air Force the kind of the most advanced stuff. But they realized that what they had was kind of hand-me-down technology when compared to what the Navy had in its possession. So in 2017, I think that's when the Air Force changed track and began to work much more closely with human-looking extraterrestrials and the Navy. And this coincides with the release of a leaked document that emerged, that was authored by the Defense Intelligence Agency as a briefing document that was laying out how human-looking extraterrestrials have been our allies, have been friendly for a long time, and they dated the UFO phenomenon back to Nikola Tesla. So yes, 2017 was when the Air Force basically made its break from the deep state, from working with the Fourth Reich and the cabal, to now working much more closely with the Navy and white hats within the US military.
But the 2012 event, or the 2017, you indicated something else appeared. What were you thinking had reemerged into our consciousness?
This is the implication to the whistleblowers. think back in history of whatever books you have read about what was supposed to be happening in the Middle East at various times, whether it had to do with religion or just wars and battles. And think in your own mind's eye about some of the questions of who were some of the voices that were smiting Mennonites, and were the smiters actually extraterrestrials with very strict agendas to keep the human androids under control? And what happens if the strict power left and then decides to come back? And what if entities from that power base that we associate long ago is what returned in some fashion in December of 2017?
Or the face of evil.
And that Buzz Aldrin may have been describing evidence that something that is not nice did come back, but the difference this time around may be that we are not so dumb and blind now as Homo sapien, and that we do have allies. I cannot stress that enough. We have allies that seem to have a vested interest in Homo sapiens sapiens surviving and evolving. And that's what we have to take. We have to take positive hope in that sustains, and that if something has shown up that has been around and around and around in this solar system, that we now have help, and that we are unaware because nothing has happened yet that is in our face.
Right, including being missed by a solar flare.
That, to me, is one of the most exciting parts of anything I've been able to report, is that Spartan 1 and Spartan 2 both, with people that they have worked with in the government, know that extraterrestrials showed up in the rings of Saturn with technology that would keep a solar prominence from hurting the Earth, and they did it. That, to me, is the kind of science I want to know about.
Yes. Okay, next question.
Hi.
We'll get to as many as we can, but yes.
I have two very different questions, and one was going to address the expanding Earth theory versus the continental drift. I was wondering if the Earth were expanding, what would it be expanding with? Like a balloon, like air? Or, I mean, how do you expand
Brooks Agnew explained that the
system?
ocean is creating this spreading and moving apart, pushing the continents apart. That's what he explained in his lecture.
Oh, I didn't see that lecture. And my second question is more earthly science, but how do you guys feel about greenhouse gases, methane, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and the global warming issue? I never really hear it talked about, and now science is kind of talking about that we don't really have a whole lot of time to get some of those gases out of the atmosphere. And Linda, how do you feel about that science?
I think it's the biggest problem we have on the planet.
I agree.
And that this past month of May, there was at Mauna Lea in Hawaii, they made a measurement. It was 415.26 parts per million CO2. And do you remember, it was only 10 years ago, and I was doing interview after interview for Coast and everything else, with scientists saying we cannot go past 400 parts per million. We will end up with over 200 mile an hour average wind storms when it comes to tornadoes. All of that was being discussed and predicted with computer models only 10 years ago. May, we exceeded 400 parts per million. The best metaphor that I know to give to you from all of the scientists, and I have talked to so many for so many years, all predicting exactly what is happening on this planet now. When you put up CO2 and methane, methane has been increasing because the tundra has been warming, especially the Arctic is melting faster than any place on the planet. And there is tundra up in the northern territories. It is melting rapidly. It is releasing methane. You get methane and CO2, and now 415 parts per million. It's like putting a blanket around the earth, if you think of that metaphor. That is what is happening. There's no real argument against that. And it doesn't matter anymore whether it is cars, whatever it is. We are on a planet that is heating up because the CO2 level is rising rapidly, and the methane is joining it and will continue to accelerate. It is now one of those issues that the computers are showing us. There will be over 200 mile an hour tornadoes, and they will increase, and the hurricanes, the winds get stronger and stronger. And what is the reason? Pure physics. When you heat, and we're a 2/3 water planet, when you heat water, it rises. It rises because it's turning into molecules of H2O that rises. Then you've got more water in a warm atmosphere. The water molecules have to come down after they reach a certain weight and condition. They have to come down, and they're going to continue now. The computers have been saying this for 10 years. They're going to come down in floods. It used to rain. There's going to be more and more buckets of water storms. There will also be more desertification. A lot of people say, well, that doesn't make any sense. That means it's all phony. No, it's physics. Where water comes down in one place from the atmosphere, other places will not have that water to come down. Deserts and floods go together in climate warming. There will be many other changes. We are on an experimental route now that we as humans have never experienced. Would there be any possibility that we could pull back and get the parts per million to come down below 415 parts per million now? Most of the scientific community think it's a lost cause. Some are saying maybe we have one more decade to try to pull it back. Would the extraterrestrial allies help us? I keep wondering if that's possible to ask. What do you think, Dan?
It's, man, well, here I go, not sleeping again tonight. Everything you said is totally accurate. And that's from the real science view. It's a bad situation out there, and it's only getting worse. 2015, unfortunately, was the last year of no return for your carbon dioxide. If we were to shut all the engines off on the planet worldwide, you're dealing with something called celestial mechanics. You know, it takes 2 miles to stop a train. Wait till you try to stop a planet. You can cut off every form of greenhouse effect gases right now, and it won't make a difference. The planet is already in motion. And they're right. It's a kind of a lost cause. It's going to happen no matter what. And as I've talked with a lot of my geoscience friends, they know I come to these conferences and they go, hey, can you put a good word in for us, you know, with the alien people? Because we're going to need some help. And you're right on target. That's exactly right.
I think we have to help ourselves first. I mean, we created this mess.
Well, there is, but there's a point where you can't. You
Yeah.
just don't have the ability, and you're
The
going to have
physics
help.
is really serious right now, and these storms everywhere are going to continue to get worse, and the winds. People do not understand that we are on a planet in which the vast majority of structures cannot sustain 200-mile-an-hour winds. If we are headed in this coming decade to winds in tornadoes and hurricanes that are going to start averaging 200 mile an hour, this is the odd thing. Were humans in some of the projections in human abductions dealing with UFOs and ETs over the last 50 years who have said a time comes in which humans are going to have to go underground to survive. That has come up over and over in the human abduction syndrome. Nobody fully understood what that would be. And now, maybe, it is that carbon dioxide and methane and the buildup of this blanket is going to force areas of the United States, Canada, and everywhere, they're going to have to save people, they're going to have to go underground. That may be what the abductees saw.
Okay, Brad. Yeah.
Let me take a stab at the expanding planet. I had the great opportunity of taking a 3-week trip down the Grand Canyon. Our guide said, take a look at that black rock there. That is the original core mantle of the Earth. It's one of the few places on the planet you could see it. Now, the Grand Canyon is about a mile deep. So all those layers of sediment above it is the organic material and other material that has been created on top of that mantle over time. Volcanism also would play a role, but mainly the way trees will fall and create another layer of leaves and branches, and animals when they die, and their bones, it does eventually make the planet larger. So there is some validity to that.
Okay, next question. Thanks.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Angelique Dudnikova, and first of all, Linda Moulton Howe, I would like to thank you for the last 40 years of work that you have done since 1979, since Alien Harvest, animal mutilation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And none of those years have been as exciting as this one.
My question about Antarctica. I've been watching your YouTube, weekly YouTube, 1-hour specials. So what do any of your whistleblowers have they identified the, shall I say, not even extraterrestrial, but intraterrestrial species that created the black basaltic pyramid that has 80-foot doors? And being that they know that we have been exploding fusion bombs, fission bombs, hydrogen bombs, like Tsar Bomb was 50 megatons, and being that they know that worldwide we have over 5,000, nuclear and hydrogen and neutron bombs, we would take anything out, like it would be mutually assured destruction if anything tried to attack us. We have enough to explode the planet, to split smithereens throughout the planet. So if, say, they wanted to take the planet back from us, being that they consider us the scum up top on the crust of the earth, what would they do to get rid of us, to annihilate Homo sapiens sapiens, without us using our nuclear weapons?
I think we're doing it to ourselves, right?
Yes. It's a very good question. The first is that Spartan 1 said he was shown photographs of the humanoids that our government has met with in Antarctica. And they are human-looking humanoids without hair. And I did an example in my video.
Bald. Bald humanoids. Balding or bald?
We always knew. Now, on the really serious question about nuclear, there's something that long ago, somewhere in 1989, I think, a pilot came to me first through a letter, and then I got to meet him and talk to him for a few hours. And he said that he knew for a fact that non-human intelligences are very concerned about us releasing any atomic bombs. We did in 1945, and then we had testing around the planet by various countries through the 60s. What happened in the 1960s with all of the Minuteman bases and other nuclear operations having UFO intrusions, and that was in our face, even if the public didn't know it was happening at the time, and that eventually there was another pilot who told me he was in one of the bombers that was flying to the Bikini Island when we were going to test a hydrogen bomb.
Right.
And I cannot remember specifically, it was in the 60s. And it was critical. It was a demarcation point because this pilot said there was a general on this flight that was going to be involved with this hydrogen bomb test out. I think it was on Bikini Island.
Bikini, yeah, and next to Christmas Island.
Okay. And this is a pilot talking to me firsthand about a discussion he had with this general. And he said, I said to the general, sir, what are they, and he meant the ETs, going to do if we do this test? Because we're not supposed to be doing tests with atomic or hydrogen bombs. They knew about the warning. The ET said you can't do this. And why did the ET say that we could not do these bomb tests? Is because there was direct communication that when we exploded, when we had a fission atomic bomb, it tore into other dimensions that we knew nothing about. And the part of the alien presence during the 60s and the 70s at our Minuteman bases was to keep us from destroying or interfering with other dimensions that we did not understand the cause and effect. On this bomber, this pilot, when talking with this general, said, what are they going to do if we explode this hydrogen bomb? And he said the general's answer was, it's our planet, and we will do what we want. And you can imagine that, right? If it is true that we are in one dimension of a matter world, and that there are perhaps 88 keys of frequencies like a piano or more, each one a dimension, and that we don't know what we are doing, that we can tear into other dimensions, it would explain why some other intelligences have been coming here and why there was a tremendous amount of interference in the 60s and the 70s to stop us doing tests. But it would also explain why the Pentagon and the Department of Defense then took the position that we are dealing with a threat to national security.
We have to wrap up.
And when the Department of Defense takes a position that something is a threat to national security, we are on a military warring foot with it. It is possible and ironic that some of the alien presences that have even perhaps been in and out of Antarctica are not hostile to us. They are hostile to us breaking into other dimensions by unleashing bombs. And this brings me to what intrigues me now. What could UN in North Korea really do by launching, for testosterone bastard reasons, a nuclear missile. And then what would this country, for testosterone bastard reasons, reply? And would that be allowed, or would that be the moment that they would finally make themselves present and say, you cannot do this, and here are the reasons why, and that would force the issue of the headline, "We're not alone in the universe," and is that how we would be introduced to extraterrestrials?
Well, thank you. Well,
Linda, thank you for the last 40
okay,
years. Thank you.
Do you have one last, well, I think we do have to wrap up because do you have a burning question?
What's happened to the 17 scientists? That's a great story.
Okay. What?
They disappeared and went on a plane to Christchurch, and no one has ever heard anything. Nobody has ever been able to track them down. And the same with the AMP. This was a legitimate news story in April of 2002. There was an Atlantic mapping project. It was associated with the BBC. They had sent out information that they had found an under-ice pyramid, that they had taken video. They were going to air this. The Navy came in and did a fast court order to stop. The Navy says that they took video, and they gave all kinds of reasons why they could confiscate it. It was AMP versus the Navy. It's a very complicated story, but the bottom line is there was a TV crew, and they disappeared in Antarctica, and they have never resurfaced.
Well, thank you. I think we don't have any more time because they're running out and we have to set up for something else, but I think we just scratched the surface of the continent, really.
But wasn't this fun?
Yes. David Adair, Linda Moulton Howe, Brad Olsen, and Michael Salla. More than you ever could imagine about Antarctica. And there's more below this.